Good evening. You are listening to Radio Free Magonia, the official podcast of the Magonian Research Group. As always, I'm your host, Michael Parrish, and tonight we have what I call a house show. That is where the guest is a member of the MRG, Appalachian Oddity. Now, I've known you casually on the server for, I think, since I first joined, since you went by another handle.
hmm
And we're finally just doing this now. Let's just start where it starts. What do you do and how did you start doing it?
Well, it's always the classic interview question, right? Like, what got you
Yeah,
started? What's your origin story?
like you're a
Uh,
superhero or something.
yeah, exactly. Bitten by a radioactive Mothman, and then you started researching Mothman. Um, well, yeah, I'm a Fortean, like
Mhm.
everyone in the Magonia Research Group, pretty much. But I started with folklore, with West Virginia folklore, because I'm from West Virginia,
Okay.
and so I started with the books in the school library, like the Mothman prophecies,
Hmm.
facts behind the legend, behind the red eyes, books like that, books about Mothman from John Keel and Jeff Walmsley. Monsters of West Virginia by Rosemary Ellen Golly, things like that piqued my interest as a fan of, general horror movies and scary stories and things like that. I've always had a very kind of secular, atheistic outlook on things, and but yet I was raised very superstitiously, meaning like, salt over the left shoulder and things like that.
Snake handling?
No, not Pentecostal or anything. Just
Oh.
that would be cool though. I mean, there is a lot of that in West Virginia, but just like general superstitious stuff, I was raised on. That I don't know if I believed in, but I kind of followed that. So that's kind of a an upbringing thing. So something about the Mothman story and the paranormal kind of spoke to me when I started getting into it. You could say that I followed Mothman down the rabbit hole back in 2016. And so through John Keel and the books I was reading, I was introduced to the Fortean world. Monsters, spirits, UFOs, psychic phenomena, all manner of oddity. And I got really interested in high strangeness. I'm interested in contactees. So mostly just Mothman stuff led me to be interested in West Virginia folklore. And then I went on a bit of a journey of discovery, traveling across West Virginia to go to different locations. I went to the Mothman Museum. I went to Flatwoods back before they even had a museum. And, the general haunts, like the haunted areas, like the Moundsville, West Virginia State Penitentiary and the Weston, West Virginia hospital there, the Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum, they call it. So I kind of just went around to those different places and learned as much as I could and read a bunch of books. And now I just say I'm a Fortean. I'm interested in all of these things. I started to entertain the notion that there could be something genuine to these stories. There could be some phenomenon behind all of this, some great cosmic puppet master consciousness behind all of these things, as John Keel talks about in his books, the Operation Trojan Horse. So that's kind of what led me from just being interested in the folklore and the history of my home state to considering that these monsters and UFOs and things that people see, that there could be some genuine, unexplained as of now consciousness or phenomenon behind it all that manifests forth these apparitions that people are interacting with to generate that folklore. So that's kind of what my drive is. I started off as the Mothman historian, that was my handle I went by. But
Hmm.
now I have a project, Appalachian Oddity, which is a website and a YouTube channel.
You kind of live in that, what I call the Appalachian axis, that intersection between West Virginia, Southwest Pennsylvania, and Western Ohio. That area is, I don't want to call it a hotbed, but it's storied. I remember reading that there is a parallel. I forget if it's the 33rd or the 37th.
Yeah,
It cuts
37.
through the country and it cuts through that area on its way. Do you have an explanation for that? Or at least speculation, I assume?
A speculation as to why there's so many interesting like monsters and stuff, or as to the why you're
Yeah.
talking about.
Yeah, the standard answer you'd get from Forteans is geomagnetic.
I would probably take a different tact with that. I would say it's a cultural thing. I think that folklore has a longer shelf life in country or places. My mom used to say, like, the old folks say this, and therefore
Hmm.
don't open an umbrella indoors, throw salt over your shoulder, all that sort of thing. If you go somewhere and you forget something, you can't turn around to go get it. The old folks say this, the old folks say that.
Well,
But I
are
also,
you?
I also think that everywhere has folklore. So, West Virginia is fortunate enough to have stories like the Mothman, the Flatwoods Monster, the Grafton Monster, the Greenbrier Ghost, tons of UFOs and hauntings and stuff. But I think everywhere has folklore if you look hard enough and if there's people there to document it. And we've had some good people in West Virginia documenting it, like Mary Heyer, John Keel, who came to visit and documented a lot of the folklore, and even to a lesser extent, Ray Barker, despite his trickery. He was at least there to talk to some of the locals. So I think that it's more organizing and that sort of folkloric research stuff, like people writing down and taking seriously what the people are saying. Also, Ruth Ann
Now,
Music is
are
a
you
great documentary.
are you referring to the creatures themselves or to the belief in them? I guess what I'm asking is, are you saying that the human belief in their existence sustains their existence?
That's one way of interpreting it, I guess. But I'm just talking about the reason we know about them. I think everywhere has folklore and strange events occurring, but some places are able to document it, and other places might shrug it off. West Virginia's been fortunate enough to have good archivists, people documenting the folklore and taking it on board as serious. So not only the belief, but the writing it down part.
Okay. Now, you say you approach this from an atheistic standpoint. Well, what do you mean by that?
Well, I was just talking about my early viewpoint on things when I was more looking at this stuff as just folklore. So, as I said, when I was reading those books in the library, I would spend time there taking notes and trying to pinpoint each sighting in the books I was reading and creating a timeline, which I now have on the AppalachianOddity.org. But I would ask people about the Mothman, and they would kind of like, oh, that's dumb, that's not real. And I would be like, well, I don't know what these people saw. I can't, like, I have no way of knowing that. But it's more interesting the folklore side of it and the cultural aspect of it. And I think it's an interesting story. And
Hmm.
my upbringing was not religious; it was superstitious. So I think that kind of led me towards the paranormal. But through my research into the Fortean stuff, I got more interested in the idea that there could be some cosmic consciousness behind it all. So I say
Okay.
that's a marked change. So I don't know if I would still even qualify as that. I guess because I don't believe in it, because I can't prove it, I'm still kind of agnostic to the idea of a consciousness behind the folklore. But that was a marked change in my research somewhere along the way.
So you approach this as something of an anthropologist.
Yeah, somewhat.
I didn't know this when I first met you, but you're not a true believer like myself and Tom and HL.
Well, if you know where the term true believer comes from, then you probably wouldn't want to use that term. It means someone who's like dogmatically fanatical, and So no, I'm not a true believer of anything. I
Okay.
don't think Charles Fort was either, or even John Keel. They theorize and they come up with ideas, but they don't believe wholeheartedly in the ideas that there is a consciousness behind this folklore. There is some kind of trickster pulling the strings. John Keel talked about it, but he didn't say, I have evidence of this and this is true. He theorized about it and had no way of proving it, so he was agnostic about it, and he would use the term agnostic to describe himself, and you could apply the same to Charles Fort. So, yeah, I'm more in that camp of it, but that doesn't prevent me from, being obsessive, and doesn't prevent me from theorizing my own points about how the nature of this phenomenon might work. Like, oh, maybe it does these specific locations, and maybe it likes this specific time of year, or, it does around this kind of trend. It pops up more. So, I still
Well,
theorize about the way it could work if it does exist.
what specific times of year would you speculate about?
Now, those are just examples. I mean, we're approaching Halloween now.
Hmm.
So I think, I had an interesting experience in childhood on Christmas Eve where I saw what could be described as a UFO, an identified flying object in the sky. So I think it likes holidays, if the sightings are to be believed.
And when you say holidays, not just you don't mean just Halloween.
Yeah, just any kind of holiday.
So you have found a recurring pattern of events kind of ticking up around Easter, Valentine's, Christmas, etc.
Well, not like a true statistical analysis, but just like
No.
seems to be. And you could come up with a bunch of different ideas of why that is. Like people being more stressed during that time of year, beliefs in supernatural things during that time of year, like Santa Claus or the Easter Bunny or things like that. If you could look at a parapsychological way of viewing that. But yeah, just the one I was throwing out there as an example.
See, that's interesting because holidays are arbitrary. They don't reflect natural processes or patterns. They're usually designated to commemorate an event in the history of a particular culture or a particular place. So,
Yeah,
supposing this intelligence is real, it would be interesting to see why it would have an interest in those things, in those human cultural constructs. But that's not entirely true because solstices and equinoxes are natural phenomena.
yeah, like the
And
changing of the seasons and stuff.
yes, and for centuries, since the earliest days of our species, those have been recognized as, I wouldn't call them holidays per se, but as significant dates. And the phenomena definitely seems to recognize those, or seems tied in with those, in a way that I think has more to do with with them, with the times themselves, and not with us.
Well, I take a more cultural look at it because I think it has to do with a hypothetical phenomena that could be interfacing with the mind. And as John Keel talked about, manipulating mankind through culture, manipulating them through folklore and mystical experiences that turn
Yes.
into folklore and theology. So I was saying that it seems to play on cultural trends and the zeitgeist of the time. Like maybe some folklore that has no truth behind it, it will take on that guise and wear that mask and interact with a person in that context. So
Rearranging our concepts, as Valet would say.
yeah, and the whole idea of influence, like it could influence mankind through the culture and through folklore and theology, mystical experiences. Take a look at Marian apparitions and how they change the culture of the place that they're seen. They build a church there, it becomes a pilgrimage site, not different from when someone sees a Bigfoot in a small town and it becomes a festival location and people make a pilgrimage out there. So the same kind of thing where people have some kind of mystical experience with the other and it changes the culture of that town, that location, be
Mhm.
it a small town in America or some village out in the country somewhere.
Now, you speak of the phenomena manipulating, existing in a kind of odd symbiosis with human culture. Do you think that the phenomena modeled the physical appearance of the Flatwoods Monster, of the Mothman, of the Grafton Monster, etc., based on things that it observed in human culture? Could be popular culture, entertainment, the arts, anything.
Well, I think that it would have to be a two-way street, that the
Mhm.
phenomena could be influencing mankind to see these things that way, like being a very old story that then people put into their culture, and then when they think of something scary, they think of that. So that would be the phenomena influencing what they see. Like you have to,
Mhm.
it looks like this. But the other way would be the phenomena taking on the guise of, for example, something that is primal. I talked about Marian apparitions. Marian apparitions are these motherly, soft, caring kind of apparitions to tell you these messages of peace and love and all that. The idea is they're taking on a primal, nurturing, motherly thing, which is innate to human beings as mammals, right?
Mhm.
The opposite end would be something like a winged creature that swoops down and grabs you, which would be a primal fear of mammals, because mammals are afraid of looming predators in the sky that could reach down and grab them. So
Mhm.
perhaps to frighten people or scare people instead of giving them like depends on what their message would be. If you have a message of peace and love, you'll appear as their mother. If you have a message of fear, like get away from here right now, you would appear as a threatening primal fear, like a winged creature with red eyes. So I think that could be maybe like an attempt to scare people off, Point Pleasant. But with the Flatwoods Monster, that was an interesting one because it's more like it depends on what version of the Flatwoods Monster you're going for. Is it the rocket ship Flatwoods Monster or the Kathleen May Frankenstein monster, Flatwoods Monster? But, I think it's an interesting case.
So, what do you think the Flatwoods Monster?
There's not really much to it because it's kind of like these
It's just
kids.
happened once.
Yeah, exactly. But these kids see a light in the sky, they follow it, they see this monster. We don't know what it is. They say it's more like a rocket ship. Kathleen May describes it having like appendages. Was worse than the Frankenstein monster. There wasn't as good of newspaper coverage. Like in Point Pleasant, we had Mary Hyre, and she was able to cover
Yeah.
the stuff very accurately. The newspapers in Flatwoods kind of played it up. It grew in height. The smell that they smelled became like acidic over time as the newspaper blew it up
Phone
more and more.
games,
Yeah, exactly.
phone game type distortion. That happens.
Yeah, and you didn't have because the researchers were Gray Barker and Ivan Sanderson. So we have we can trust what Ivan Sanderson was saying a little bit more than we can trust Gray Barker. But
Hmm.
this was early in Barker's career, so maybe he was trying to play it straight. No real way
Maybe
of
he
knowing.
wasn't as full of shit yet.
Yeah, that's what I was implying. But so yeah, I think the Flatwoods Monster is cool. It's very iconic. If you look at it, it's more of the story of an image, because that classic image that everyone thinks of is the drawing that was drawn on We the People. A sketch artist drew that based on Kathleen May's description, and that's the
Mhm.
thing that goes across all the newspapers and all the T-shirts and bumper stickers and all that. It's been appeared in countless
Yeah.
video games. So when we think of the Flatwoods Monster, we think of that image. So it's more the story of an image. It's like a meme. But yeah, I think it's cool. If we look at these things and try to divine them or interpret them like tea leaves and understand what they were trying to tell us, if we take them on as messages and try to interpret what some force beyond us could be trying to communicate, it's all like we have to sort of guess. Like those two examples I gave are like kind of clear primal examples, but like what are they trying to tell you with some kind of red and green rocket ship or monster man? Not exactly sure. I think it's interesting and important folklore and deserves to be documented, but I don't always have a theory as to what they could be or what they were trying to say.
Well, let's move on to the Mothman then.
Yeah, which I
What
talked
if,
about briefly.
yeah, what if anything do you see in its appearance? In the winged figure with no head, with red eyes embedded into its chest, where its pectoral muscles would be. If I'm remembering correctly, because it's actually been years since I've studied it, with no arms, just wings. But what do you possibly see in its movements, in moving through the air without actually flying, because its wings weren't flat?
I think a lot of anomalous phenomena and paranormal stuff, I think a lot of it, if you boil it down, it's just a way to make something uncanny, a way to make something odd and peculiar so that you'll take note of it and say, that's weird. If you see a bird flying normally, you're not going to take note of it. You're not going to be like, that's weird. But if it's abnormally large, it becomes uncanny. If its wings don't flap in motion, then it becomes uncanny. It becomes odd. It becomes peculiar and other. And I think the phenomenon takes on guises that are other, so you'll take note of them and be aware that there is something else and perhaps somewhere else. So if I was going to interpret that, I would say that's the message behind being peculiar, being strange. The way there are some things that are purposely, I think, meant to be scary, but there are other things that are just meant to be odd that give you a sense of mystified. So you'll maybe write it down or let it influence your culture in some way, as the gods of old did in the ancient times. The headless thing, I've seen a bunch of creatures where there's an ambiguity as to if they have a head. The Grafton monster, likewise, could have been
Hmm.
having its head down, kind of a lurking position. The same is true of Mothman. There's different witnesses report if they think it had a head or if it didn't have a head. The Mothman sightings, if you go through them, there's a little bit of variety. So, like, some Mothman appearances are brown in coloration, some are darker, some are light gray, a lot of gray. The original Scarberry mallet was light gray, and the ambiguity of the head is sometimes there. Other times they have a head. Other times they're like their shoulders are arched up and the head is down. Marcella Bennett said that the creature was standing like that. So I think it's a way to make you say, okay, this isn't human or this isn't like this animal. And this is present in not just folklore but also fiction. The way to make something uncanny or strange is often to mix human characteristics with animal characteristics. And you can look to the gods of ancient Egypt and all the different pantheons, the mixture of animal and human. So Mothman,
They're anthropes.
Sasquatch, yeah, Mothman and Sasquatch are examples of that. Sasquatch being an ape with a man, and different variations of those two interminglings. And then Mothman is a bird and a man. So they're interminglings of that to make something scary. And when people design fictional monsters, they do the same.
Now, what do you think the purpose of the Mothman wave was? Not the whole wave with all the bells and whistles, just the individual sighting. Do you see any kind of symbolic, perhaps Jungian or archetypal significance there?
Well, there could have been some general zeitgeist in the town of winged creature, bird creature. Like, I'm not sure why that would be in everyone's mind, but there could have been something that was present in their psyche that would just be like bird creature that the phenomena could have tapped into in some weird way. That's one idea. The other would be, as I talked about the primal fear thing of a looming predator in the sky, if we want to look at the phenomenon there as being benevolent, you could say that it was trying to scare people away. It's like, the whole predictive tragedy thing, saying,
Hmm.
okay, there's going to be a tragedy here. You guys should get away from here. So here's a scary looking monster to frighten you away. So that's one idea you come up with as the
I
benevolent Mothman.
I was toying with the notion that the entire thing was symbolic and predictive. You noticed it chased recipients, it pursued recipients, but it never actually caught and harmed them.
Mhm.
Perhaps that movement in and of itself was symbolic. It symbolized how, this catastrophe is going to happen soon, and there's nothing you can do about
Yeah, like it could be like a precognitive manifestation, like people aware of something before it happens, and it makes something manifest. Mothman Prophecies movie goes way into that with the lightning, and your hair stands on the back of your neck before the lightning strikes, and that sort of predictive capability. But I think each individual witness had their own Mothman, if you think about it. The variety in description, I don't think that there was one being that appeared all across the different locations. I think that it manifested and demanifested then and there,
it.
and that was one individual Mothman each time. I haven't found an example where there's two sightings in different locations at the same time, but there could have been. So I think of Mothman as an individual manifestation to each witness that has variety that is built upon their psychology. So that's kind of the way I look
Okay.
at it.
Yeah.
Once again,
Yeah,
but it's
that interests
very
me.
theoretical.
Do you think the individual differences in its manifestations could have reflected or were designed to reflect differences in the recipient's psychologies?
Yes, I do think that, but I don't know like what that would be. I don't know
Yeah.
why one person has Mothman as brown, one person has Mothman as gray. I don't know why that would be, but I think that there's some kind of your own personal Mothman. I don't know. Some people saw Mothman as white, and there's one particular witness that really always stands out to me that I don't hear people talking about. I'll only find it in my database. Long, white-haired being, March 12th, 1967, Ohio. On March 12th, 1967, at about 11 p.m., an adult woman and her 20-year-old daughter were returning home from church. There's a lot of Mothman witnesses who were coming home from church. That's a very important thing. Connie Carpenter was reportedly coming home from church. The Marcella Bennett thing, the kids that were in that house, their parents were at church. So, that's a thing I've noticed a lot. But anyway, when they turned a corner in a wooded area of Latart Falls, Ohio, they reportedly saw a large white being with long hair and a 10-foot wingspan, which passed directly in front of their car. The being then flew straight up, out of sight. The witnesses considered that they had saw an angel or even Jesus Christ. So that right there stands out to me a lot, and I don't hear anyone talking about that one. That one's in the Mothman Prophecies and in Strange Creatures from Time and Space. Mothman Prophecies, page 140 through 141, Strange Creatures 234, chapter 18. The witnesses interpreting what we consider a Mothman sighting, interpreting it as Jesus. So I think there was definitely some personalized Mothman stuff, or at least their own interpretation is personalized, the way they view it as,
Yeah.
an angel or something else. If that would have caught on, if the churches of the time would have embraced this and said, this is an angel, we wouldn't have Mothman, we'd have the Point Pleasant angel.
Yeah. Now, what about the bells and whistles? What about the other sundry phenomena that was occurring in the area at the time? There's two stories that have always stood out to me, three actually. The one is the daughter of one family, who woke up in the middle of the night, see a large man with a plaid shirt, and then it just kind of dissolved into the surrounding darkness. What do you make of that from your perspective?
Okay, could you go over the details of that again? Are you describing the Linda Scarberry thing?
Once again, man, it's been years since I read it.
The plaid shirt thing is an interesting one. I haven't really formulated my thoughts on that one. But John Keel had like a folder about the plaid shirt thing because I guess it's a pattern he noticed in his
Hmm.
cases, and then it kind of followed him to Point Pleasant because one person reported a lurker in their garage who was wearing a plaid shirt, and
Yes, I
I think
remember that.
maybe he might have told Linda Scarberry or something like that. And then Linda Scarberry had this experience years later where he was smoking a cigarette. There was this man in her house smoking a cigarette that disappeared when the light from the cross that was hanging in her room, a golden cross that John Keel told her to hang up in her room, the light shined down and made it disappear. So because John Keel told her to do that as a placebo thing, to say like, oh, this will
Hmm.
make you feel better if you have this cross in your house. Because John Keel was kind of having to try to help these witnesses through their traumatic experiences and through their questioning reality because of their odd encounters. So he was kind of helping them out as a spiritual advisor. Linda Scarberry and the Scarberry Mallets, Linda went to her church and asked them what she should do about what she had seen and what it was that she had seen. And they told her that what she had seen is the devil, that they ran out of her church. So they kind of laughed it off and said that it was the devil in a tongue-in-cheek way. They didn't really, they didn't really believe what she was saying. But if they would have, like I said, it would have been the Point Pleasant Angel. But because they didn't, it took people like John Keel, Fordians like us, coming in there and taking the story seriously. And because of that, it gets the newspaper name Mothman, and that kind of sticks around. But yeah, Point Pleasant's a very religious area, like especially back then. John Keel also described Point Pleasant as a town with however many churches and no bar rooms. And in the opening chapter of the Mothman Prophecies, he describes himself going to the door as a sinister man in black with a beard, and that they must have
I
thought he
remember
was the
that.
devil, right?
But the plaid shirt meme, that's one of the most frustrating claims he makes. And I don't remember the exact quote. It was something like, occult and parapsychological literature is littered with accounts of entities in plaid shirts. He references no
Yeah, it's like source.
specifics, no sources, no nothing. Oddly enough, it wasn't. I first read that in when I was like 17. It wasn't until over a decade later that I actually started finding these cases. So I guess he actually was telling the truth,
Hmm.
just poorly. One of the other stories from that period that has always stood out to me is the man who saw like moon faced people with long hair and reflective clothing in his backyard.
Yeah, no clue on that. John Keel talked about the procession of the damned was marching through that town. So yeah, I'm sure there was a bunch of wacky characters and such.
Yeah. And then there was the case of the men in black who actually paused in the middle of the street and tried to force someone into their vehicle.
That was the attempted kidnapping of Connie Carpenter.
Yeah. What do you make of that? Were they actually trying to kidnap her and whisk her off to some netherworld, to some void, or was it a staged event intended just to instill fear? There was no real intention of abducting.
Well, we could get into the Men in Black if you want to talk about that, but
Let's
specifically
just
that,
focus on this one incident for
yeah,
now.
well, this specific one, it's interesting. John Keel, he described Men in Black as a generic term, so he used MIB to regard people that weren't even in black suits.
Hmm.
And the attempted kidnapping of Connie Carpenter, the person was wearing a colorful mod T-shirt, like a hippie kind of outfit. And this person on Wednesday, February 22nd, 1967, Mothman witness Connie Carpenter was walking to school when a black 1949 Buick drove up beside her. The young man driving was tan and clean cut, with thick, combed black hair and a colorful shirt. He opened the door of the Buick and asked Connie for directions. When she got closer to the vehicle, the stranger tried to grab her and pull her into the car. She was unable to get away, but the sleeve of her blouse was ripped in the process. She ran home and locked herself inside. The next day, a threatening note was slipped in her door, reading, "Be careful, girl, I can get you yet." This attempted kidnapping is often recontextualized as a Men in Black attack because of the dark vehicle and her being a Mothman witness. So that's my entry on that.
That may actually have just been
Yeah, that's what I'm
a
implying.
mundane attempted crime by a human criminal.
Yeah, that's what I think. I think that was just a regular, attempted kidnapping of a young girl, some creep in a Buick trying to pull her into the car. That's
But
what I think
then
that is.
again, I highly doubt, his hairstyle, his manner of clothing was very common in Point Pleasant at the time.
Yeah, he might have been from somewhere else.
But then again, yeah,
Yeah, so I think that one is because when Keel came to town, he had a lot of ideas already in his head about the Men in Black. It comes from Gray Barker Al Bender, and he kind of warned Mary Hyre a lot. It's like, be careful about these Men in Black. And then Mary Hyre experienced, some strange people in her office. And Connie
yeah,
Carpenter is Mary Hyre's niece, if you didn't know that. Reporter Mary Hyre, who did a lot of the Mothman collecting of stories and kind of folkloric research. So you got to imagine like that going through Mary Hyre's head, like what she must have thought with she has John Keel, this reporter from New York, coming in and telling her about these Men in Black, and then her niece who saw the Mothman, that happens to her.
to be fair, that could have been an anomalous event. That could have been a non-human entity assuming a human form. If we're looking at patterns, it does fit. It does fit the Men in Black's MO.
If they would have said something about her sighting, I think I would probably agree with you. If they would have said, "Don't talk about what you've seen," or something like that, I think maybe then I would be like more inclined to think it was mysterious. But just from what it is not exactly have anything to do with what she saw. It's more just a general threatening encounter.
Yeah.
But there was also another one where Marcella Bennett that has the hostile motorist encounter where some guy in what's described as a fright wig, a bushy wig, tries to ram her off the road and block her path, and she has to go around him. So that's an encounter that also kind of gets tied into Men in Black. The main Men in Black stuff was at Mary Hyre, with Mary Hyre's office.
What do you think? Because I don't think there's any ambiguity there. I'm pretty sure that was a legit anomalous event. How do you interpret that?
Well, I think the Men in Black are kind of the personification of paranoia and the fear of censorship. So that's
Okay.
kind of what I think that's why UFO researchers are so afraid of them, is because they represent, the witnesses not being able to speak the truth, not being able to get the story out there, the message behind them, if there is, it's that. But I'm pretty skeptical of, some of the Men in Black encounters because I think there is other ways to explain them that would make more sense. But, I used to be much more into it. But as I look closer into some of the Men in Black experiences, especially the ones in Point Pleasant, I'm like, this could just be a awkward UFO fan. Because John Keel wore black suits and went around asking about UFOs, that if they tell about their sighting, that they'll have to experience a bunch of nonsense of people calling them up and bothering them. If John Keel can be mistaken for a Men in Black, then, you or I or anyone else who is interested in anomalous phenomena could also be mistaken that way if they ask
Yeah.
questions and look sinister to the witness
I
or
have to
awkward.
counter that. I have to politely counter that by pointing out how many UFO researchers in the mid to late 60s wore black suits and hats, and how many wore jeans and t-shirts.
I think there was
And
an effort on the part of UFO researchers to look official and professional, get their business cards in order
yeah,
and some of them wore ill-fitting, cheap suits to the local area where there are UFOs and they want to look presentable and professional to the people they're interviewing. Like, hi, nice to meet you. I'm a reporter from so and so. And also, if we take on the idea that the phenomenon guises itself and masks itself in the cultural zeitgeist. That's to say that the Men in Black could be a mask they would wear. So I'm not dismissing all Men in Black sightings and saying they're not anomalous, because there could be people who, they're afraid of being censored, and suddenly that fear takes on physical form and
mhm.
manifests itself as a black suited figure at their door.
What do you think of the alleged Men in Black photo that Timothy Green Beckley took?
I don't know how you feel about the subject, but paranormal photos. I kind of question
I
that the phenomena would allow itself to be captured on film.
Bogus until proven innocent is usually, or bogus until proven otherwise is usually my reaction.
Yeah, so I kind of feel that way about blurry Sasquatch in the distance and figures of people standing in dark suits. So I kind of feel the same way about those two things.
Hmm.
One thing I want to
Go
point
on.
out is early Men in Black encounters, they had Asian features, they were darkened complexions,
Yes.
and they were often very tan, like Indrid Cold was tan. But
Mhm.
later stuff, they're considered more pale and they look more deathly, like a Grim Reaper.
Yeah.
I think that's an interesting note to make.
So, who or what do you think Indrid Cold was?
Well, John Keel was very skeptical of the Indrid Cold thing from the beginning.
But John Keel also got trolled by Jane Myra and by Ray Barker. So, I
Yeah,
don't. He's not an authority on anything in my
yeah.
perspective.
At the end, like near the end of his career, he was saying that he still thinks there could have been something to that original road encounter, like when he came by like I-77 or Route 47 and talked to him, in his truck. And then as Indrid Cold or as Woodward Derenberger became more of a contactee, there could have been more, influence outside of that.
Because once again, it could be easily dismissed, but then again, there are other stories independent of that one with characters with similar features
Now, I like Indrid Cold. I think it's a cool character. Big
that
fan.
Derenberger would not have been aware of.
Yep. I wonder if Lanulus is like a way of saying land you lost, because oftentimes the contactees talk about this planet that is like perfect utopian, and I think Woodward Ehrenberg had like similar like nudist colony, perfect utopian peace and love type stuff as
Uh,
well, with a Christian. I think he had a Christian slant to it.
it
Like I
sounds faux Greek to me because the suffix os, the os, is
mhm.
very common in the Greek language. It's found also to a lesser extent, in Dutch, Finnish, and in the Baltic languages, but it's the most commonly found in Greek. It sounds like a made up Greek name. To me, it kind of fits with the general motif of Greek sounding or Greek like words and letters appearing.
Mhm. Yeah, some of the contactees definitely they took on like ancient names and changed it a little bit, like the whole Ashtar thing, kind of like a like
Mhm.
Ishtar or another being named Ashtar.
Astaroth,
Yeah,
Astarte.
exactly. So as John Keel said, the gods of ancient Greece are among us again, but in a new guise. And one thing I was gonna say, because you were asking like what I thought about the odds and ends of Point Pleasant, like the weird stuff that's beyond just Mothman. John Keel seemed to think that Mothman was the distraction, and that the UFOs and the Men in Black and all the other stuff that we're talking about there, he seemed to think that was the main show, and that the Mothman was kind of distracting people and leading them away from it. And he talked about how people would spend their nights in the TNT area. Meanwhile, the UFOs would be flying over town somewhere else, or while everyone's in the TNT area after the Scarborough and Mallet sighting, that's when the few people who weren't looking for the creature, Marcella Bennett, the Thomas children, they're the ones that encounter the creature. So
What about Grafton Monster? That one I'm not nearly as familiar with.
that one is Robert Cockrell, who was a newspaper reporter. He was driving along and saw this white obstruction by the side of the road. It was kind of just like a white thing on the side of the road.
Mhm.
And people found out about it, started looking for the monster, and then the paper he wrote for, the Grafton Sentinel, started writing about it, and they were kind of trying to downplay like the sighting one of their reporters had supposedly had. So that's kind of funny. And when I first heard about it, I was kind of skeptical because he's a reporter, but the
Yeah.
fact that he's a reporter didn't help him at all, because the newspaper still only published 2 articles about it, and they super downplayed it and said like Monster Hunt is the new teenage craze. So that's kind of what that is. Just this weird. They said it was a seal-skinned monster. It was like white, and there was some of the explanations for it are hilarious. They said, what if
Mhm.
it's a bathtub that was being pushed along on a cart? And that was a funny thing that they tried to dismiss it as. The other thing was, what if it's an escaped polar bear? So some of the dismissive explanations were actually stranger than the monster itself.
Yeah,
And
that's I've noticed that's very common with skeptics. In their hurry to dismiss things, they will never look at the fine details. These explanations, so-called rational explanations, that are actually more inexplicable than an anomalous one.
I don't like to look at a creature and try to explain what they must have seen instead, like Joe Nichols with everything's an owl. Because if you're skeptical of a claim and you don't think that it's true, you could just say, I don't believe you. That didn't happen because there's no evidence. You don't have to try to come up with, some alternative explanation, really. Anyway, the Grafton Monster is one of those things that kind of was buried for a while because,
Mhm.
it was 1964, and then it kind of died down after people looked for the monster and didn't find it, which typically happens. People go out and search party, look for the monster, and then they don't find it. So it died down and was forgotten about until the 90s, when researcher Mark Hall discovered notes about the Grafton Monster in Gray Barker's archive, because Gray
Mhm.
Barker had written an article about it but never published it. So that's kind of one of the only reasons we know about it, is because Gray Barker saved the details of it. That's another reason to be skeptical of it, but the newspaper stuff is there, and the letter that Robert Cockrell wrote talking about the story is there. So if you just read those things, unless he was like secretly working with Cockrell behind the scenes,
What about other things in your area?
because of the pandemic, I haven't been able to really go around and talk to locals and try to put my ear to the ground as much as I'd like to. Of course, Bigfoot sightings all across West Virginia. There's that. There was one recently that was like, or maybe not so recently, like 2019, that was Bigfoot that had like blonde coloration, and that kind of made local news for a while and was actually featured on the radio at one point, and I found that kind of cool. And so
Mhm.
that was interesting because Bigfoots typically don't have blonde coloration to their hair. I'm sure there are the weirdest of the weird is the stuff that people, aren't talking about and might be out there somewhere if I could just find the right witness to talk about it. Most
I'm
recent odd thing I interviewed a witness about was the Cincinnati, Ohio. Someone who I talked to reportedly saw a frog-like creature in their backyard, so that was cool.
Well, how much were you able to learn about that?
I've written an article about it on my website, and I did an interview with them, and that's on the YouTube.
Now, if I'm not mistaken, which I might be, you're the one who regularly uses the Ouija board?
Yes, I have quite an affinity for the talking board.
Okay, well, let's get into that.
Okay, not sure really what there is to get into there. I just think it's a good method for divination.
You use it within the context of your folkloric research?
I don't know. I kind of just use it for because we document experiences that people have had, like mystifying experience. We catalog that data and we try to timeline it, put it in a database, and then we try to come up with theories and we analyze the data, and that's basically what being a Fortean is. But beyond that, I think many Forteans like myself like the idea that maybe we could interact with this phenomena ourselves, like not just by seeing a UFO or encountering a Sasquatch in the woods, but by talking like directly to the phenomenon, like trying to learn more about its nature in some more direct way. Because, I think all of us want to be witnesses as much as we interview them. I've used the Ouija board with friends before, collaborating and doing sort of paranormal investigations. I did one in the TNT area inside one of the bunkers. I did a Ouija board session there, and that was fun. The being at first wouldn't tell us its name, and then eventually it spelled out the word maybe when we asked a question, so it was kind of being a trickster by not wanting to answer our questions. We nicknamed it Maybe. That was a collaboration I did with a researcher from Alabama and a researcher from Kentucky. That was during the Mothman Festival.
Have you any idea what it was?
We asked what it was. We're like, were you ever human? It said no. Questions like that. And eventually we asked, are you a nature spirit? And it said yes. So it said it was a nature spirit.
Did you ask it anything about the winged elephant in the room?
Later, we did a Ouija board session a different year where I actually had a Mothman Ouija board because I bought one at the festival and we wanted to try it out in the hotel room. And so, which is the haunted low hotel. And it kept tracing over the wings whenever we'd ask a question. It would like trace over the wings as if that was an answer. And we asked if it knew Mothman. It's like, no, and things like that. Or if it's heard the Mothman, it said yes. If it likes the people coming to the festival, yes. That sort of thing. We're just kind of talking to this being. And that one had a name, which was like Sam Enoch, which is like, we thought it was maybe Samuel Enoch, some kind of name like that. And of course, Enoch is the book of Enoch, or Enoch in the Bible, the character who's ascended to heaven. So that was an interesting name. We asked what it looked like, and eventually we asked, like, do you look like an animal that we know on Earth? And it said yes, and it spelled out the word dragon. So it looks like a dragon. And we asked, because it kept tracing the wings, like, do you have wings? And it's like, yes, I have wings. That was an interesting thing, supposedly talking to a dragon in a haunted hotel.
It was not the thing itself.
That was not Mothman.
Are there any beings you deliberately thought on the Ouija board?
Trying to talk to a specific being, nope. That's mostly because I haven't had the opportunity to collaborate with many people because, we've been locked inside since 2020. So it's been hard to collaborate with people, and using the Ouija board alone is not as easy. It doesn't move as much if you try to do it solo. I think you get better results if you do multiple people. And since I haven't been able to do that, I haven't been able to do specific callouts. I did a Halloween seance, and we talked to a being that said his name was Hawthorne, and that was interesting.
It was probably pulling your leg.
Yeah, I think that Ouija board responses come from the subconscious. So I think, if anything, you're kind of talking to yourself. That's not exactly dissimilar from paranormal experiences, because I think that paranormal experiences, in some way, what you're interacting with is something from your subconscious. I leave it open that there could be some spiritual force manipulating or influencing the motion of your hands through the subconscious and through the mind to tell you what to say. So I don't know exactly how, but I do think that the Ouija board functions via the ideomotor effect. So it's either just the subconscious, or it's the subconscious aided by something else, which goes the same for apparitions of all kinds.
Well, that is increasingly becoming the consensus across 49 and in general, that at the very least, the subconscious does play a very active role in it. I personally believe that it originates independently of us. It exists independently of us. It is external to us. It has an objective existence of its own, but I do think it works through the subconscious.
Yeah, I always say it interfaces with the mind. So that's kind of my understanding of it, is that you have your mind and your subconscious and the primal things about humanity that we're afraid of and that we care for. And then you have this consciousness outside of ourselves that is like a psychic force, or this consciousness that the occultists talk about that surrounds us at all times. Mm-hmm. And so that is something, this cosmic being, that then interfaces with the mind. There's a bunch of different ways you could try to fit that into science and come up with, like, oh, maybe it's extra dimensional, or maybe it's, quantum physics, or maybe it's some kind of electromagnetism, as John Keel talked about a lot. So you could say maybe there's some force that can generate like electromagnetic pulses or something like that, could then surround the mind and influence it like that, kind of like the God helmet there, where there's electromagnetic pulses and things that go around the head. Perhaps in certain areas, the phenomena can do that naturally as opposed to artificially. That's one way of trying to explain it scientifically. I think if there's any field in the Fortean sphere that's going to understand this and come to an answer one day, it will probably be parapsychology. But of course, I could be wrong. That's the one that I hedge my bets on.
Thing. Parapsychology was popular in the 70s. It was part of the zeitgeist back then. You had mainstream universities setting up parapsychology departments. it was an actual career, a vocation. You could be a professor in it. But it seems, when Forteana fell out of fashion in the 80s, parapsychology fell with it, and it was replaced with teams of amateur ghost hunters showing up at people's houses with cameras and voice recorders. You know what I mean?
I would agree with that. So I think that if we're ever going to come up with answers of some way of understanding more about the nature of the phenomenon, I think it would be through parapsychology, because I definitely think the mind is at play.
It is
With
something
the
that needs to be revived.
Mhm. And I'd like it to be more, I don't know, accessible to people. Though I
Yeah.
do like the integrity of people who really study it and they're actual psychologists. I think that's important. But I do like the idea of just the general public being able to play around with the in the field of parapsychology in terms of like experimenting things like that. Being the test
So
subjects more than the professionals.
I'm kind of winding down the show for the night. I assume you've had experiences of your own.
Yep.
Let's discuss those.
Well, the first one is the one I mentioned a bit ago, which was when I was a kid. I saw these three red lights on Christmas Eve when I
Yeah.
was traveling with my family to go to a relative's house to open Christmas presents. We saw three red lights like in between two mountains, like a clearing in between two mountains. It was also by like a railroad crossing. And there were these three red lights, and we looked at them. We thought they were strange. We're like, is that a new cell tower? They started moving slightly back and forth, like almost swaying. And a cell phone tower doesn't move like that, doesn't sway. And so we pulled over the car, like right beside the railroad tracks, I think, and we looked on at these red lights as they gently moved back and forth in between the clearing of these two mountains. We didn't know what it was. None of us jumped to UFO or anything like that. We all thought that it could be some kind of natural thing that's part of the landscape. Like, are there lights there? Are there moving lights that have been added to the side of this somehow? Eventually, nothing happened, so we just decided to head on out to our relatives and open Christmas presents. We resolved that on the way back, we would check to see if they were still there. Of course, we come back and they're not there anymore. They disappeared. They're gone. So these were, red flying lights. I consider that a bit of a UFO story, unidentified flying object.
What other experiences have you had?
Well, recently I had some poltergeist experiences in my house. It could be
Oh,
from the tension of quarantine, like staying inside, but it was
yeah.
over 2020. The doorknob on my door started moving, like jiggling as if it was trying to be opened. It started twisting and turning, and it was like someone was pushing on the outside of the door. And I woke up to that happening, and I just kind of looked at it, and it stopped. So I'm like, okay. So I got up and I opened the door, and there was no one there. So that was a weird experience to wake up to. And then another thing happened much later in 2021. I turned around to my door being open. I had not opened it. So that was some weird stuff with my door, apparently. The other thing was I walked by an empty room and I heard like a gasp as if like, they were scared or they were startled by me walking past the room. So apparently I'm scaring the ghost now.
Do you think it could be your own research that's causing these experiences?
I would think so. You can never really know because of, like if you own items that could be haunted, if you travel to haunted locations constantly, there's the idea like, oh, maybe you're being followed by something, or maybe you're just showing an interest in it and, the void stares back. So it could be that.
Yeah.
I welcome poltergeist activity. I think it's cool. I definitely want more. That's kind of my take on it.
Never heard anyone say that or anything even remotely like that. Hypothetically, and I'm not mocking you here. I genuinely want to engage you over this.
For
Suppose
researchers.
this phenomena escalates in your home, the point where lamps rising up into the air and smashing against the wall. Your casserole is ruined. All of your chairs are on your kitchen table. You just place them back down on the floor, and now they're back on your table again to the point where it's actively interfering with your life. Would you still welcome it then?
It would depend on how much it was interfering, because I kind of take for granted as a given that if there is a phenomenon that's interfering
Mhm.
with my life, it's already influencing me, it's telling me what to do. I'm a bit of a fatalist. I already think that. So I wouldn't really mind. If it was annoying, maybe I would be upset, but I also think I would do the calculus in my mind of the trade-off of interacting with some spiritual force, and I think I would probably 9 times out of 10 take that trade-off as like, cool. I think that's a good thing. Go ahead,
All
turn the
right.
lights off.
Well, hypothetical, you eat a banana, and instead of throwing the peel away, you just toss it back into the fruit bowl. Now,
Okay.
then you turn and you go somewhere else, and behind your back, you don't notice the peel levitating into the air and then gently dropping onto the kitchen floor. Then you turn back to get something out of the refrigerator, and you trip and fall on it.
I would
right?
love to have a camera fixed on it when it was doing that. That's the number one thing. But I also kind of believe that, like, if I had a camera pointed at it, that it would not do that. So I always like the idea of being able to catch it on film, but I kind of
Hmm.
think that it avoids film purposely. I've gone months without anything happening to my door, so I'd have to have like full on what's that movie, Paranormal Activity. I have to like set
Hmm.
up cameras all over my house in order for that to work, and I'm really not willing to do that. If I pulled out a camera when the banana started floating, if I was able to get it on film then, that would be cool. But I kind of think that the moment I pull out a camera, either the banana would drop to the floor or the camera would suddenly mysteriously not work. So that's kind of how I feel about that. You know, you're walking through the woods looking for a Sasquatch. I think there might be more possibility that you'll see one if you don't have a camera with you. So the documentarian side of me wants to document it, but the Fortean who's read a bunch of these stories says you probably can't do that. So if there
Yeah.
was a bunch of paranormal activity happening in my house to where like a banana peel was floating, I think I would be cool just looking at that. I'd be like, that's awesome that that's happening. If I slipped and fell on it, it would depend on how bad it hurt. If it hurt a lot, then I'd probably be a little upset. If it didn't hurt that bad, I think I'd be okay with it. Like if I go into a haunted house, if I got like scratched, I think I would be cool with that. I'd be like, take a photo of this scratch I got. People have like stigmatas, like big holes to their hands and feet, and they consider that a miracle. So if a ghost wants to like scratch my forearm, I'm cool with it.
Have you done anything in rural areas with like trail cams?
Well, I've done like classic, just walking around trails looking for something, and I've done like call blasting with Sasquatch sounds, the Sierra sounds. I played those in the woods,
And
and
what happened? Anything?
nothing.
Yeah.
But I've done wood knocking as well, where you kind of like knock on trees and hope that you get like a reply back. I've done that as well.
Any results?
No, typically you don't get any results. That's what typically happens. It's considered paranormal for a reason.
That knocking is very similar to like seance table knocking.
Yeah, exactly. I would love it if the walls in my room would knock back if I asked a question, like the classic things like that, the seance experiences. I did a seance on Halloween and the tripod got kicked. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I've never been to a seance. I've never conducted a seance. I don't know anything about seances, although I'm leery of them in general, as I think most quote unquote professional mediums are frauds.
This is just a
But not
seance
but
that
kind of like honest frauds, like it's implicitly understood that this is for entertainment purposes only.
Mhm. Well, this was just a seance that I was doing, like, myself. Like, I was the one kind of leading the seance. So I was
Okay.
just, trying to open up communications that something could come through and talk to us if it wanted to. So it's more just like intention setting, like sitting down at a table and saying, okay, if there's anything here, you're free to talk to us. And that's kind of how it was. We did
Yeah.
Ouija board. We did like trying to make the table tipping thing. We tried to do that. We asked for knocking noises. We also did like the scan radio communications. But the only thing that we
Well,
got that was anything beyond, the Ouija board giving answers or the scan radio giving answers was the tripod being kicked. And of course, the camera moves on camera. You can see the camera get kicked, but you can't see what kicks it. And, there was nothing there. So it's kind of like has this
and
plausible
yeah.
deniability
And
that the
so a
paranormal.
skeptic or a normie could see that footage and just think, "Oh, that's somebody's leg doing that."
Yeah, we didn't do that. And there was no like animals. It wasn't like a dog or a cat or anything.
Yeah. Or a
And
string, a fishing lure.
yeah, so I think the paranormal, when it does things that it allows to be on film, I think it has to have that plausible deniability. Like only if it's in the distance and you can't see it, then we'll let you have a photo. But nothing that you can take to the bank and say this is 100%. That would be giving away its element of surprise, and that's
Yeah.
not good strategy.
Now, when conducting a seance, does the number of participants have any effect?
Not sure. I don't know. I've only done one, and it was a three-person seance.
Because logically, you could, if it's all about intention setting, you could expect it to have a kind of the more the merrier effect.
It could. Like people like try to do psychic stuff to bring forth something psychically. Everyone like sitting in a circle, and that's kind of what people who are into witchcraft they do.
Yeah, it's like if it's all about intent, the more people in the room who have the same intent could produce stronger results. Or maybe it doesn't work that way. Maybe this phenomenon does not work in a way that is logical by human standards.
hmm well, if you
You
think
know,
about the whole thing, if you think like, okay, one person trying to contact, okay, now a small seance table, now a coven, and then eventually a town, like that's where folklore comes from. So,
mhm.
there is a communal thing there, but there also are just individuals who have mystical experiences. One thing I wanted to talk about, because you said, like, what experiences have you had? In 2017, during my early time in between being strictly folklore and researching in that way and being more Fortean, there was one thing that I don't know if you could consider it more the phenomena taking notice or whatever, was
Yes, I want to hear this.
I was in the TNT area, the bunkers, and I had gone there so many times. You know, I've been to the Mothman Festival tons, and I ended up collaborating with a bunch of people through that. Every time I went to the TNT area and I looked at all the bunkers, nothing happened. Like I never got like noises in the distance, or any kind of like winged creature never swooped down and say hello. It become normal, because something that's you do over and over again, no matter what it is, becomes normal. So walking among these discarded bunkers became normal to me. And I was bringing my parents because I wanted to show them, because we were in Point Pleasant, and I was, showing them around because I was so familiar with the place by this point. We're about to leave. I'm like, oh, you guys can't go without seeing the bunkers. So I walked them down the path and I showed them the bunkers. And when we got to one of the bunkers, there was 3 knocking noises. And so the knocking noises were they echoed out. It was just knock, knock, knock. And then I went in and there was nothing in there. There was no animal, nothing in there.
I had acquired an EMF meter and had it with me on the trip. We walked down the path to one of the bunkers. I had my camera, but I was only recording quick moments because the memory and battery were getting low from the long trip. I filmed as I approached the bunker with the EMF meter ready in hand. No spikes, as expected. The moment I shut off the camera, I suddenly heard 3 distinct knocking sounds. Startled, I jumped back. What the heck was that? I assumed either an animal or a person. I asked if someone was in there. No response. No figures were seen in the darkened igloo. At this point I was thinking it could be an animal hiding in there, and I was determined to find the source of the noises just to be sure. I got my father to go back to the vehicle and grab the flashlight, which I'd forgotten. In the meantime, I stood firmly there in front of the entrance, blocking the path to make sure nothing left the bunker. When he returned, I went straight into the bunker and shined the flashlight around everywhere. Nothing. No animals, no people. So what made the 3 knocks? My most logical explanation is that either something fell from the hole in the top of the bunker and reverberated a few times, or there was perhaps 3 individual objects falling, such as 3 rocks hitting the cement floor one by one. I'm not sure what else it could have been in such an enclosed concrete dome. Nothing was in there. I confirmed this thoroughly, and we stood in front of the bunker the whole time. Nothing walked out, human or otherwise. My mother said that when I jumped back, the EMF meter went off in my hand. I didn't see this, and perhaps she was mistaken. There should be nothing in the TNT area that would make an EMF meter go off. At least nothing explainable. Of course this would happen the moment I stopped filming. I wasn't able to get my camera back on in time to film the 3 knocks, only the aftermath. I went into the bunker and recreated the noise. It sounded exactly like 3 footsteps. These experiences also seem to happen when you least expect them. This time I wasn't in the TNT area trying to find anything or explore, just to quickly show people around.
The best explanation I could come up with is that maybe there was, you know how the top of the bunkers, have you ever seen them before? They have like a hole in them. I thought maybe like rocks had fell down, like one after another.
I've only seen them briefly in photos and in documentary footage. I actually don't really have a good idea of what the area looks like.
Yeah, well, they're concrete bunkers that are dotted around randomly along these pathways where there are ponds. And they're dotted around like that so that if you tried to take them out from the air, you couldn't take them all out at once.
Okay.
And they're ammunitions. They stored ammunition in there, but now they're empty and they're concrete. And if you go in there, it echoes. And they have a hole in the top of them. So I think maybe there could have been something that fell down, but we didn't like approach and like touch the door or, go touch the wall or something. There's nothing that would make 3 rocks fall down, but that was my best explanation for what it was. So 3 random knocking noises, and of course it happened when I wasn't expecting anything and when I couldn't record. So that's when it happened, right then and there.
Okay.
And
you interpret that as an acknowledgement of sorts.
It could be initiative, because if you think about the Freemasons, that you knock on the door 3 times.
Yeah.
Also, afterwards, this is where it got really weird. I had been taking antibiotics. Apparently, I was allergic to them that day when I got home after my weird experience at the bunker, that the antibiotics started having a weird effect on me. I remember I came inside and I was going towards my room and I collapsed in the hallway. Apparently, the antibiotics were having some effect on me that was causing my liver to shut down. And so I was hospitalized and put on IV, and I was hospitalized for 3 days. So knock, knock, knock. And so that was
That's creepy. You know, severe illnesses are often seen, in some cultures at least, as harbingers of a shamanic initiation.
hmm And like I said, I told you I used to be like super folklore, like this is cultural, this deserves to be documented anyway. And then I become like more, there could be something to this. And this was 2017, which I was, 2016 is when I started. This is right around that time when I was like, there could be something to this phenomena. And then that happened. I've always said that the investigator is Sisyphus because, if you ever seen my Appalachian Mystery Society logo, Sisyphus is the being that climbs the mountain, pushes the rock up the hill, and every time it rolls back down. He's engaged in this meaningless task of doing the same thing over and over again. So I've said the investigator is Sisyphus, but the witness is Prometheus, because Prometheus is the guy who goes to the heavens, brings the fire back to earth, and shows us a glimpse of something beyond ourselves, shows a glimpse of the gods. If you're familiar with the myth of Prometheus, he was punished for bringing the fire back from the gods. His liver was pecked out by birds.
Yep. In my ignorance, I always pronounced the name Sisypheus. Before we go, I just want to ask a very mundane question. What's it like inside the bunkers? How big are they? What's the atmosphere like? Could you camp out in them?
They're covered in graffiti. If you were there at nighttime, it's cold inside because it's concrete and it's thick. It's probably not the best place to like camp out, but some of them are more clean and it's echoey, so it's not really good for recording. So if you wanted to go in there and record a session of something, there's a lot of echo, so it's got bad audio. So it's cold and it's dark and there's bad audio, but it's kind of cool. It's like standing inside of like a globe, like standing inside a dome, a concrete dome.
Yeah.
It's kind of like the Integratron, actually, if you know about George Van Tassel and his Integratron.
Vaguely. I'd have to refresh my memory for that.
It's the building that he built out there by Giant Rock that was like...
Oh, yeah.
It's kind of like that because it's echoey.
That's an interesting connection because, sound, cymatics, things like that does play a role in this.
The first Mothman sighting was actually by the North Power Plant that's since been torn down. And so there's really nothing to look at there. It's just like a blank foundation. But people often tour around those bunkers. There have been a few sightings around the bunkers, but they're not like the main Mothman hangout.
Yeah.
The North Power Plant was called the Bird House because that's where they believed that the bird lived. That's what they called Mothman. They called him the Bird.
Appalachian Oddity, I thank you for appearing on our show. If you've nothing else to say, then that's the show.
Thanks for having me.
It's no problem. Thanks for being on.
Peace.